The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Leila was in the kitchen, half watching the clock on the oven, waiting for a delivery that should have arrived an hour ago. One of those quiet, unremarkable Tuesdays where nothing is wrong and nothing is particularly right. Just a day. The kind of day you won't remember in a week. The kettle had just finished boiling when her mobile rang. Sheffield number. Unknown. She nearly let it ring out, she nearly pressed decline, but something made her answer. Is that Leila? A woman's voice. Soft. Northern. The kind of voice that sounds like it's been chosen carefully, like the person on the other end has been rehearsing what to say for a while, getting ready, working up to it. Yes, Leila said. Who is this? A pause. It's Amy. Adam's Amy. Another pause. And then, the words that would change everything. I just wanted to ring to say thank you. For this month's payment. I know things must be tight with the baby coming, it genuinely means everything. Leila stood very still. The kettle was still hissing quietly on the counter. The delivery van was probably turning into the street somewhere. The oven clock was ticking. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, except nothing was. What payment? Leila said, and the line went quiet. Stay with me. Because this story, Leila's story, it's one of those that gets under your skin and stays there long after you've stopped listening. Not because of the drama of it. Not because of the arguments or the tears or the solicitor's office or the counseling sessions that didn't fix anything. But because of the smallness of it. A phone call. A thank you. A Sheffield number she didn't recognize. And the 4 years of silence that one phone call unraveled. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that Leila trusted me enough to tell me what happened. And I think the reason she wanted this told, the reason she said yes, tell it, let people hear it, is because she knows she isn't the only one. She knows there are women listening right now who have sat on a cold kitchen floor, phone in hand, scrolling back through months they thought they understood, wondering how something could be hiding so perfectly in plain sight. This is for them, and it starts, as most stories of betrayal do, not with a lie, but with a beginning. Leila was 34 years old when the phone rang on that Tuesday. By most measures, she had built a good life. Not a flashy one. Not the sort of life that would make anyone envious on Instagram. No villa holidays, no coordinated home aesthetics, no perfectly curated feed. Just a real life. A solid life. A Sheffield terrace with a second bedroom they'd argued gently about what to do with. A job she was good at and didn't hate. A sister who rang her on Sunday evenings just to chat. She wasn't the sort of person who talked about luck. She believed in showing up. In being the person who rang you back when she said she would. In remembering things that mattered to other people. She'd grown up in a house where you didn't make scenes, didn't complain for the sake of it, didn't dwell on things longer than necessary. Her mum was the same. Her sister Priya was the same. They expressed love through doing. Through driving across the city at 7 in the evening. Through making tea. She'd met Adam when she was 27. A birthday due for a mutual friend in Leeds. One of those nights you almost didn't go to, the kind where the bar is a bit too crowded and the music is a bit too loud and you end up standing near the same person for most of the evening because neither of you quite knows enough people to feel comfortable moving around. He wasn't the most striking man in the room. He wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't the loud one. The one telling the story that had everyone's attention. He was just present. He listened when people talked. He remembered things. 3 weeks after that birthday party, when they went for coffee for the first time, he asked about the project she'd mentioned in passing. Something she'd half forgotten she'd told him. He'd remembered. He wanted to know how it was going. She fell for that. Of course she did. There's a particular kind of man, women talk about this sometimes, in the way you talk about things that can't quite be translated into a list of attributes, who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. Not through flattery. Not through grand gestures. Just through the quality of his attention. The sense that when you are talking, he is actually listening. Filing things away. Caring about the detail. Adam was that man. Or he had been. Or he had seemed to be. They took their time. 2 years of dating before he proposed. Properly, no audience, no theatre, no restaurant with everyone watching. Just the two of them on a Sunday morning in the flat they'd been sharing for 8 months, him sitting across the breakfast table with a ring in a small velvet box. A box he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks. She found out later, because he kept losing his nerve. She was 30 when he proposed. She said yes before he'd finished asking. They married 2 years after that. 60-something guests. A venue on the outskirts of Sheffield. Her mother crying before the ceremony had begun. It wasn't a perfect day. The photographer was late. The flowers weren't quite right. Adam's best man forgot half his speech and had to improvise, badly. But it was theirs. Every imperfect, slightly chaotic, genuinely happy minute of it. By the time the standing order had been running for a year, Leila and Adam had been married for 2 years. They lived in a 2-bedroom semi, a house they'd stretched their budget for, painted themselves over 2 weekends, argued pleasantly about furniture in. A house where they'd sat on the sofa on Sunday evenings and talked, the way long-term couples do, about what came next. The children, maybe. The extension, eventually. The life they were slowly, steadily building. She knew about Amy. Of course she knew about Amy. Every long-term couple has a before. Adam's before was Amy. 3 years together, more serious than casual, less serious than marriage. They'd lived together for part of it. When it ended mutually, apparently, though Leila had never pushed for more than the outline and Adam had never offered one. What she'd known was this: Amy existed. They'd been together, and then they hadn't been. Adam was a decent person who didn't carry bitterness about it. The end, what she hadn't known, what would take 4 years and an unexpected phone call from an unknown Sheffield number to discover, was that the ending wasn't entirely what it appeared to be. Because somewhere in 2020, when Amy Thornton had lost her job and was facing the loss of her flat and was too proud to ask her family for help, she'd rung Adam. And Adam had answered. And Adam had said, "I can help." And then he had opened his banking app and set up a standing order. Pound 420 a month. Toa Thornton from their joint account without saying a word. There is something uniquely cruel about the mechanics of a standing order. They are designed, engineered, specifically, to be invisible. That is the entire point of them. You set them up once, and then they run. Month after month, in the background, quiet and automatic. They appear on your statement as a line of text sandwiched between the mortgage and the direct debit for the broadband. They don't flag themselves. They don't ask for confirmation. They don't leave a trail of texts or late-night calls or suspicious absences. They just go. They exist in the space between things you notice and things you don't. Pound 422 A Thornton. Every month. For 4 years, Leila would later sit at the kitchen table with a calculator. She had to see the actual number, had to make it real and concrete and impossible to minimize and work it out properly. 48 payments. At £420 each. £20,160. £20,000 from the account with both their names on it. The account they paid into equally. The account that held the mortgage and the food shopping and the weekend away they'd saved for and the new boiler they'd had to replace unexpectedly last winter. That account. Their account. With both their names on it, and one of them had known about A. Thornton, and one of them hadn't. When Leila put the phone down after that first call, the call from Amy, the thank you, the what payment, she stood in the kitchen for a very long time. Not doing anything. Not thinking clearly. Just standing there while the kettle cooled and the oven clock ticked on and the November light outside the window went a shade darker, and then she opened the banking app. She didn't want to find it, but she knew exactly what she was looking for. She pressed standing orders. The list loaded. Slowly. One of those moments where technology is almost deliberately cruel, making you wait a few extra seconds for the thing that is about to change everything, and there it was. A. Thornton. £420. Monthly. Set up November 2020. Leila sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Not in a crumpled heap. She just needed to be lower. Closer to the ground. She pressed her back against the cabinet under the sink and felt the cold of the tiles through her jeans, and she sat there, holding the phone, reading that line. Reading it again. A. Thornton. £420. Monthly. Set up November 2020. She went into the full transaction history. Scrolled back. And back. All the way to the beginning. November 2020. December 2020. January 2021. February. March. April. Month after month after month. A quiet little row of identical figures, marching backwards through 4 years of her marriage. Through Christmases. Through the argument they'd had about his mother that spring. Through the pregnancy scare in the summer. Through the new boiler, the weekend in the lakes, the birthday dinner she'd organized for him that he'd cried at. Through all of it, without pause, without interruption, without a single mention. Pound 422A Thornton. Pound 422A Thornton. Pound 422A Thornton. She didn't cry. She noticed that about herself, much later. She'd expected to cry. Most people would have cried right then, on the cold kitchen floor with the light going and 4 years of secrets scrolling past them on a screen. The tears would have made sense. They would have been the appropriate, understandable response, but they didn't come. Instead there was just stillness. A very particular kind of stillness that isn't calm. It's more like the moment between a glass falling off the counter and hitting the floor, when you can see exactly what is about to happen and your body has not yet caught up. She sat there on the cold tiles, for she didn't know how long. And then she rang Amy back. Amy answered on the second ring. "Leila, I need you to tell me everything," Leila said. "From the beginning. All of it." A pause, and then Amy said, "Okay." She'd lost her job in early 2020. Office administration, a role that had gone in a round of redundancies that came with very little warning, in the way those things often do. She'd been renting a flat in Sheffield. Good area. Nice enough place. But her savings were thin, and her landlord had given her 2 months to sort something out or he'd need the property back. She hadn't told her family. Too proud. Too stubborn. She'd always been the one who managed things, the one who had it together, and the thought of ringing her mum and saying she didn't know how she was going to make rent felt like a defeat she wasn't ready for. So she'd rung Adam. "Old habit," she said. Not romantic, she was very clear about that, very careful to be clear. But when things went wrong, Adam was someone she'd always been able to talk to. Even after the relationship ended, even after they'd gone their separate ways, they'd stayed loosely in touch. Not often. Not intensely. Just in the way that some people do, when something real existed between them once and there isn't a specific reason to completely disappear. She told him what was happening. Not asking for anything. Just telling someone who she trusted, who she thought would understand, who had always been steady when things weren't. And Adam had said, "I can help." Not much. But I can help. The standing order was his idea. £420 a month, enough to cover a chunk of her rent while she got back on her feet. He'd framed it as temporary. Just for a few months. A bridge. Until she found something else. Within 6 months, she had a good job. Stable, well-paying, the sort she could build on. And she'd rung Adam and said, "I'm sorted now. Cancel it. I don't need it anymore." And Adam had said, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." She'd pushed back. He'd said it again. "Honestly, it's fine." And she'd thought, here, Amy's voice got quieter, more careful, more precise. She'd thought that Leila knew. She'd assumed that any married couple with a joint account had conversations about their outgoings. She'd assumed that £420 a month to an ex-girlfriend was the sort of thing a husband mentioned to his wife. She'd assumed that if Leila hadn't asked, it was because Leila was fine with it. Comfortable with it. That it had been discussed, decided, agreed upon. She had no idea that Leila was hearing the words standing order and A. Thornton for the very first time, sitting on a cold kitchen floor in November with the banking app open. She was sorry. She said it simply, without performing it. She was genuinely, deeply sorry. Leila thanked her. Quietly. Carefully, and she hung up, and then she made a cup of tea. That detail matters somehow. In the middle of all of it, the standing order, the 4 years, the ex-girlfriend who'd thought she knew, the husband who'd told nobody, the £20,000, she filled the kettle, waited for it to boil, made a cup of tea, because when everything falls apart and you don't yet know what to do next, you do the smallest, most ordinary thing you can think of. You make tea. You keep your hands busy. You give your body a task because your brain cannot process what it has just received. She made a cup of tea and she sat down at the kitchen table and she waited for Adam to come home. She thought, sitting there, about what she was going to say to him. She went through versions of it in her head, the way you rehearse difficult conversations, testing the words, feeling how they sat, imagining his responses. She thought about raising her voice. She thought about crying. She thought about being completely silent, letting him speak first, waiting to hear what he would volunteer before she showed him what she knew. In the end, she didn't do any of those things. What she did was sit at the kitchen table with her phone face up and the banking app open, on the standing orders screen, with A. Thornton visible in the list. She put it where he would see it immediately. She didn't arrange anything else. She didn't plan a speech. She just sat and waited. He came home at 6:30. She heard the key in the lock. Heard the door. Heard him drop his bag by the stairs, the same sound, the same sequence, the same 2 syllables when he called out, higher, the same ordinary word he'd used every single evening for 5 years of their marriage. Like punctuation. Like a signal that the day was done and the evening was theirs and everything was fine. Higher. She didn't answer. He came through to the kitchen and he stopped. She was sitting at the table. The phone in front of her. Face up. He looked at her. Then he looked at the phone. And she watched something move across his face, a look she hadn't seen before, or hadn't recognized before as what it was. Not guilt, not yet. Not only guilt. Something more complicated. Like a man who has been carrying something for too long, and the thing he has been dreading for months and months has finally arrived, and some part of him, some exhausted, terrible part of him, is almost relieved that the waiting is over. Everything all right? He said. She looked at him and she said, sit down. He Saturday. The kitchen was quiet. The cup of tea she'd made had gone cold. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog was barking at something, the completely ordinary sounds of a completely ordinary November evening in an ordinary Sheffield street. Everything exactly as it always was. Amy rang today, Leila said. To thank me. For this month's payment. He didn't speak. For years, she said. £420 a month. From our account. And you said nothing. He still didn't speak. He was looking at the table. Say something. It wasn't don't. Quietly. Clearly. No raised voice. The kind of don't that leaves no room. Don't tell me it wasn't what I think. I've already spoken to her. I already know everything. So just tell me the truth. He was quiet for a long time. The clock above the cooker kept ticking. The dog down the street stopped barking. The house was so silent that Leila could hear her own breathing, and then he said, I didn't know how to tell you. She looked at him across the table. At the man she'd stood next to in a venue on the outskirts of Sheffield and made promises to. At the man who'd remembered the detail she mentioned in passing over coffee 3 weeks after a party. At the man with the ring in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks because he couldn't find his nerve. That's not a reason, she said. That's a coward's answer. He flinched. She noticed. She didn't feel bad about it. You hid £20,000 from me, she said. Over 4 years. In a marriage. In a joint account with my name on it. That's not a mistake, Adam. A mistake is forgetting to cancel a subscription for a month. Maybe 2. But 4 years, every single month, you saw that leave our account, and you chose to say nothing. You made that choice 48 times. Every single month was a choice. He started to cry. She didn't. She had thought she might. Sitting on that cold kitchen floor, she'd imagined that when she finally faced him, when it was real and in the room and not just a number on a screen, she'd cry. That the grief of it would crack something open. It didn't. What she felt was something colder and clearer than tears. Something that would take her a long time to name properly, but that she'd later describe, very simply, as the feeling of the floor moving. Not in a dramatic way. Not a collapse. Just a shift. Like discovering that something you'd been standing on very confidently was not quite as solid as you'd believed, not because he still had feelings for Amy. She believed him when he said it wasn't romantic. She couldn't explain exactly why, but she believed him. This wasn't about desire. This wasn't about a man in love with 2 women. This was about something quieter and, in its own way, worse. This was about a man who had decided, at some point in November of 2020, that managing her reaction was less important than avoiding it. That keeping a secret was easier than having a hard conversation. That she didn't need to know. That he could make that choice on her behalf month after month, for 4 years, and she would never look closely enough to notice. He had written her out of her own financial life, not maliciously. She didn't think he was a malicious man. But thoughtlessly, and cowardly, and continuously she asked him to sleep in the spare room. He said okay and he went. She rang Priya at 7:15. Priya didn't ask a lot of questions on the phone. She listened to enough of it to understand, and then she said, "I'm coming." And she drove across the city with a bottle of wine that she didn't open and a box of biscuits that neither of them touched, and she sat with Leila in the kitchen, the same table, the same cold cup of tea still on the counter, and she listened. Leila told her all of it. Start to finish, out loud, hearing herself say it for the first time as an actual sequence of events. Amy's call. The banking app. The standing orders screen. The cold tiles. The second call to Amy, everything from the beginning. The tea. The wait. Adam's face when he walked into the kitchen. The 48 choices. Priya sat very still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't say what she would have done or what Leila should do now. She just listened, the way Leila's family had always shown love, through the quality of their attention, until Leila had finished, and then she said, "That's a lot, Leila." And she meant it in the fullest, most honest way. Not "that's terrible" in a performance of outrage. Just, that is a lot. A lot to have taken in. A lot to be sitting with. A lot to be expected to know what to do with. They watched television for a while. Something neither of them was paying attention to, just the glow of the screen in the quiet kitchen, Leila with her legs tucked under her on the sofa, Priya beside her. Not talking much. Just occupying the same room. Sometimes that is the only thing that genuinely helps. Priya left at midnight. She hugged Leila at the door long enough for it to mean something, and she said, "Ring me tomorrow." Whatever you decide. Leila went to bed. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark in the bedroom that was hers and Adam's, while Adam was down the hall in the spare room, and she thought about the house. This house. The mortgage in both their names. The walls they'd painted. The plans they'd made on Sunday evenings. She thought about what Amy had said about how she'd tried to stop the payments, and Adam had said, "It's fine, don't worry about it." About how Amy had assumed that Leila knew. About what that assumption revealed, that to the outside world, to the woman on the other end of that standing order, Leila had been present and consenting and informed. While in reality she had been none of those things. She thought about the human logic of a secret that grows. She could see it. She didn't want to. It would have been easier, in some ways, to see Adam as straightforwardly dishonest, a man who lied deliberately and without conscience. But that wasn't quite right either. She could trace the shape of it, a moment of genuine compassion in November 2020, a standing order set up in haste to help someone he'd once loved through a crisis, a plan to tell Leila about it later that became next week, that became next month, that became next year, that became the longer I leave this the harder it gets, the bigger the confession needs to be, the more it will change things. She understood that logic. She hated that she understood it, but understanding why something happened doesn't change the fact that it happened. It doesn't give you back the 48 months. It doesn't rebuild what was dismantled month by month in the background of your life. She lay in the dark and thought, and in the morning, she rang a solicitor. The solicitor was a woman in her 50s. Calm, direct, no wasted words, exactly the kind of professional you want in a moment when you need information and not performance. She laid everything out clearly. Joint accounts. Leila's legal position. What the outgoing represented and what her options were. Leila thanked her, paid for the hour, and went home. She didn't make any decisions immediately. That matters. It's important to say that Leila didn't act from panic. She went home and she thought about it. She thought about the marriage, the real marriage, the whole of it, not just the banking app, not just the standing order. She thought about the 7 years she'd known Adam. The 2 years they'd dated and the 5 years they'd been married. She thought about who he was at his best, and who he'd been in that kitchen the evening before. She thought about whether those two versions of a person could exist inside the same future. She gave it 3 months. 3 months and 3 sessions with a counselor, a woman in a beige office in Hillsborough who was practical and unhurried and very good at not flinching at anything either of them said. Adam came to every session. He said everything right. He talked about the fear, how Amy's situation in 2020 had felt like an emergency and the standing order had felt like a quiet solution to someone else's crisis, and how he'd intended to tell Leila, and then the days had passed, and the weeks, and before he knew it the secret was too big and the moment for telling it was too long gone. He talked about the shame that had grown in proportion to the time he'd spent not telling her. He talked about loving her. About not wanting to lose her. She believed him. That was the hardest part. She believed he was sorry. She believed he loved her. She believed the whole sorry, cowardly, escalating logic of how it had all gotten away from him. And she sat in that beige office, with the pale carpet and the box of tissues on the side table, and she tried, genuinely, seriously tried, to imagine what it would feel like to trust him the way she had trusted him before the phone call. To open their banking app on a Tuesday afternoon without automatically going to the standing orders screen. To not wonder, every month, what else she didn't know. To not notice the particular quality of silence that falls when someone is deciding what to share with you. She couldn't get there. Sorry doesn't give you 4 years back. Trust, real trust. The kind that isn't earned all at once but accumulated day by day across years of small honesty, isn't something you rebuild in 3 sessions. Or 6. You can't sit in a beige office and reason your way back to it. Either it's there, or it isn't. And Leila sat in that room with the counselor and the pale carpet and looked at the man who had chosen, 48 times, not to tell her the truth about something that was hers to know, and she realized, with the quietest and most complete certainty she had ever felt, that it wasn't there not because she hated him. She didn't, but because she couldn't unknow what she now knew about him. About who he was when things got difficult. About who he protected when protecting someone meant having a hard conversation. About who he decided not to burden with the truth. In the spring, they separated. It was civil. She later said it was one of the most civilized terrible things she had ever been through. The conversations about the house and the accounts. The paperwork. The careful, quiet untangling of a life that had been built together. She kept the house. The 2-bed semi in Sheffield that they'd painted themselves over 2 weekends and argued pleasantly about furniture in. She was more grateful for that house than she had ever been grateful for anything. Adam moved into a flat across the city. They didn't see each other often. When they did, a forwarded piece of post, a belonging collected, they were polite. Not warm. Not cold. Just careful. The way 2 people are with each other when something real existed between them and now they have agreed, wordlessly, not to pull on the threads of it. And in December, the December after the spring they separated, the December that closed that chapter for both of them, the standing order stopped. Leila noticed it on the statement. She noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound you've stopped consciously hearing, the boiler that goes quiet, the dripping tap that someone finally fixed. A gap in the list. A line that no longer appeared. A. Thornton. Pound 420.00. Gone. She sat with that for a moment. The fact of its absence. The fact that for 4 years she'd scrolled past that line without knowing what it was, whose name it carried, what it meant. All those months. All those ordinary Tuesdays, and she thought, I'll look closer now. At everything. I'll look closer at everything. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, not necessarily the standing order, not necessarily the ex-girlfriend, not necessarily the specific shape of this particular secret, but the feeling. The feeling of discovering that the person you built your life with was managing something without you. Deciding what you needed to know and what you didn't. Protecting you from a truth that was yours to have. Trust your gut. That is the only thing Leila says when she tells this story now. Trust your gut. She'd had moments, small ones, nothing she could have pointed to as evidence, where something had felt slightly off. Where a number on a statement had looked unfamiliar and she'd moved past it. Where she'd asked a vague question and received a vague answer and told herself that was fine. She won't do that anymore. If something feels like it needs to be asked, ask it. The conversation you're afraid of having is almost never as catastrophic as the alternative. And the alternative, as Leila can tell you, is a Tuesday afternoon phone call from an unknown Sheffield number. Leila is doing well. She still lives in the 2-bed semi. She's still close with Priya. She still makes tea when things go wrong, and she checks the standing orders now. Every month, she checks the standing orders. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt true, or close, or uncomfortably recognizable, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. This is a space for real experiences, and every comment gets read. If you're new here, subscribe. We post every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday real stories, real women, real emotion. Hit the bell so you don't miss one. I'll see you next time.